All right, we're continuing a look. It'll be a short look. Traditions versus transgressions. We began looking at this last week. I'm going to continue on with that first section and finish up the first section. Then I've consolidated the next two sections a little bit smaller, so it won't be quite as long. But these two I did want to continue on with. We were leading up to this next section. And again, what we're talking about are things that at one point were taught as sin and maybe weren't necessarily sin, but more tradition. Now, that does not mean that these are all things we should do. It just means that one, we should know what the Bible actually says about something. We shouldn't just refrain from something because something was taught as sin, or because by tradition we don't do certain things, or because it's not a good idea. Maybe there are things that aren't a good idea, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more as we go along here. So, the question of eating in the building has often been taught as that's something that's just not appropriate. Well, not appropriate is a different word. That it's been taught as sin, and so that is can be kind of problematic. Let's look at the origin of that belief. Arose as a boundary marker during controversies over social gospels, the church and church-sponsored recreation and banquets. Over time, the argument became the church isn't for eating, because the building isn't for eating. So, in response to wanting to avoid a lot of the push toward a more social gospel, we started saying, well, look, the church isn't for this. It isn't for these social activities. And then it pushed further into, well, it's a sin for that. The building is now became the problem. What we need to understand is really the right and wrongs in actual areas, and where things may be. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to go ahead with these. The arguments. The church building is God's house, and eating is secular. It shows irreverence. It turns the church into a social club. And if we allow food, we'll drift into unscriptural practices. Now, this particular argument is not, these aren't all bad arguments, but they're not cause for saying this is a sin. Now, certain things can lead to certain abuses. When it comes to eating, what comes to mind biblically that might have been might demonstrate that something that led to an abuse, Brother Tharp?
Of course, Corinth is always the example,
Indeed.
but it wasn't that they were eating, it was that they were showing inequality among members.
Yes.
But that's the scripture I always hear pointed out.
Indeed, indeed. So the issue there was something else, but them eating the way that they were led to something. Now, there's another thing in connection with that we often forget. They were doing this in connection with something. What was it connected? The Lord's Supper, and that was part of the abuse that we're talking about. Now, how do we deal with that? Let's look at the scriptures that were often used in light of this. And as Brother Tharp already pointed out, 1 Corinthians 11 is one of the first ones that come to mind. What, have ye not houses to eat and to drink in? Or despise ye the church of God and shame them that have not? What shall I say to you? Shall I praise you in this? I praise you not. So now, this often is used to say, see, look, they were eating. Don't you have homes to eat in? So you're supposed to eat at home. What do you say to that? Yes.
Well, I first would point out that they were talking about the Lord's Supper. Are you telling everybody to go home and eat the Lord's Supper at home? Because they were celebrating the Lord's Supper as a larger feast than we do currently with a sip of grape juice and a piece of cracker. So it was a different circumstance. Now, there are churches that have tried to bring that back, and it usually ends up a mess. So I can see some of the theory behind it doesn't make it a sin.
Right. So, but he is saying, don't you have houses to eat and to drink in? Right? He's telling you to eat and drink at home. Right? So why can't I conclude that I should be eating and drinking at home? Yes.
Again, he was talking to those that were laying out a rich feast when there was people that were nearly starving next to them, not sharing. So they're saying, do that part at home. So, again.
Sister Buttrey?
This wasn't during a service, was it?
Yes.
Yep. It would be during because they were doing this in the name of the Lord's Supper.
Okay, then that's where you would find it unscriptural. You can't find a scripture for actually eating a meal during the service. It was not part of the service to eat a full meal.
Brother Young?
I'm not sure whether I'm jumping ahead or not. Paul, we have examples of where people meet in houses.
See, this is the part of the complexity of this, where when we try to simplify it, and I believe, as I started with this, a lot of this comes from a good place, wanting to prevent people from going into dangerous practices. That's not a bad thing. However, you all know me. I believe that when it comes to the Bible, we should preach the truth of the Bible. And we should teach the application of it as well. We should teach good ideas, good practices. That's all involved in the Bible, but the Bible says what it says, and we shouldn't go further than that. Now, Brother Tharp?
Yeah, I was going to say, the complexity of it is we've had work parties when we were at our old building. And it's not a service. We would do a potluck outside, set up tables, chairs, and eat on the church property, but nobody would dare take the food inside and eat. So why is the building given some holiness that it doesn't have? Why is outside on the lawn that's owned by the church not treated the same? So there's this disconnect and this built up idea you can't eat inside the building, but on the property, how's that different?
So, like I said, all of these things we can see could come from a very good place. And then over time, it gets taught in a certain way. And then all of a sudden, the building becomes the problem. It's not the service that was a problem. It's not the abuse of the Lord's Supper that was a problem. It's the building becomes a problem. Now, we know the building is not the church. We know this. We meet inside this building. Who meets inside this building? The church. The church meets inside this building. So we know this, but by tradition, this has become no longer tradition, but sin. And so what we need to first understand is what the Bible has to say. Now, we're not even consistent about it. Like you said, the church property, guess is not necessarily the building, so maybe outside of this is okay, but inside. A mother nursing her child, no one has, in my experience, has ever had a problem with that. That is a child eating. I have a lot of asthma problems. Water usually helps. I bring water with me all the time. The text here says, don't you have houses to eat and drink in? But I've never heard of a building, a location that has had a problem with someone drinking water. But it says eat or drink in. You can't make an exception for one without the other. Am I wrong? So consistency says, look, that's not what's, if we're going to be consistent, you shouldn't take a cough drop. You shouldn't do any of the things that have traditionally been done, right? So we've been inconsistent because our teaching is incorrect. It's not a sin. That's the problem. Now, before I go into that next one, yes.
Part of it was also came out of when the church was splitting between those that were going, what we would label as liberal, but they don't label it that way. But people who had a kitchen, a banquet hall, a bus, and they split ways, and they dramatically wouldn't allow any of those things. Is there a problem with having a kitchen? If you store the Lord's Supper in there and you wash the stuff, and no. But you can see that they didn't want to be associated with people that they thought were doing wrong.
Yeah, I am consolidating these. I was going to consolidate that, but we're going to talk about that point next. And I did want to talk about it separate because it's become a broader issue of teaching as well. And so it just made more sense to keep that one separated. So we're going to talk about that in just a moment. Brother Young.
The dichotomy is the churches of Christ spread kind of westward from the farming community of the south to the west, and yet every congregation in the farming community, they eat and they have a kitchen, they have a community hall, they share meals in the building. And yet, what changed? When the church moved west, what have changed? I just
Yeah, so let's address that, and I haven't forgotten also about what you said about the houses because that's and a very important part of this going into the next portion as well. Now, so let's talk about that. What's changed? What is it that we're trying to do? One, we don't want abuse. That's easy. That's clear cut, right? Abuse of the Lord's Supper was a problem. Abuse of anything. I was at a congregation once where we had small groups. We were meeting in different people's houses. Nothing wrong with serving a meal in a house, right? No one's ever had that as an issue. So we would meet from house to house, and the host would put out a light snack. Then it became a bigger thing, and it became a bigger and bigger thing, and then it's full meals. You're coming together, everyone's trying to do something bigger. There was a person, single. She was single and wanted to host the activity, but felt she couldn't because she could not provide that level of service for a group of people. And it was never about that. So something small, like just providing some light snacks and refreshment, can become a problem, can grow into a problem, right? My story is probably not unique. You could probably connect that to something in your own past where things just keep growing and you forgot about the original purpose of it. As a group, maybe forgotten about the original purpose. Unfortunately, with small groups, I have no problem with small groups meeting, obviously, but my consistent experience with them has been that sort of thing. So what do? Never say it's sin for small groups to have small groups. Churches shouldn't have them. The Bible teaches it's sin because it leads to abuse. The Bible doesn't teach that. Now, wisdom may dictate that you don't have those groups if you can't avoid that. Or you closely define what it is you're going to do, right? So there's many ways to keep from leading to abuse. One is by teaching about the problem of abuse. That is the core thing. Teach the truth about a problem. Now, if you're coming here for a meal, for a social gathering, what happens if we start putting, we've got bottles of water here. What if we put water with crackers? People might be hungry. Maybe a little bit of cookie there because sometimes people are hypoglycemic.
Can I suggest coffee and donuts?
Coffee and donuts.
I second it.
Mini donuts.
So,
Mini ones.
look, the building is not the problem for that. But one, if that is now your draw for service, that's a problem. The food is not the sin, though. The problem then becomes the purpose. So should we avoid it for that reason? Probably, maybe. Maybe that's a good reason to avoid it. We can teach truthfully, right? We can just be honest. You know what I could also say? When you have a bunch of people eating food, crumbs, ants come. Is that a good reason not to eat in here? It's a good reason. It's not a sin. It doesn't make it a sin. It just, I could argue, that's a good reason to avoid that. And we can be honest about a lot of these things. That's more the practical, one's more the actual spiritual, the tendency to slide into some sort of abuse. But we do need to understand what it is we're teaching. Brother Tharp.
The elders at West Anaheim at one point said, okay, we're having problems with people leaving sweet drinks sitting around or spilling and attracting bugs. And they said, you can have water, but nothing else. And since they're elders, that's enforceable. Now, they didn't say it's a sin to do this, they just asked us not to do it, and they had a reason. And that's the way it should be done. And
the Bible teaches, obey them that have rule over you. Why? They're watching for your soul. Now, is that a soul issue, that stickiness or something like that? Look, somebody's got to clean it. There's all of these things are a function of oversight. That is a responsibility. So, yes. Now, is that the decision that should be made? You might say, well, I don't agree with that decision. What about that? What happens if you don't agree with the decision of the elders? Are you sinning because you don't agree?
No.
You
You can
can
talk to
agree
them.
to disagree.
Yeah, I can disagree with that. But when I come, if in that situation, I'll bring water. Why? Just because I disagree doesn't mean I can't submit myself to their oversight. Right? See, once we start becoming honest about how we feel about things versus what's right and wrong, it's so much better. We can be honest. We don't have all of these weird contradictions. We can just be honest about why we don't do something. Not make new rules. That's absolutely important. So, I'm going to skip over those other ones. How about having a kitchen or fellowship hall?
Nothing really wrong with it.
But there's a strong teaching in some places about it's wrong.
Yeah.
Why? Why is that taught as being wrong? Yes.
It associates us with liberal churches that we don't want to go there. A lot of what we say is no is because we don't want to be identified as doing what they do
Yes.
a lot of times, so we hold back.
Yeah, Brother Tharp, did you have?
I was gonna say something similar. It's not wrong, but we already identified some of the things it leads to, and identification is part of it too.
Yeah, a lot of it, brother,
At
Mike.
one time, this congregation did have a church and a kitchen. When we first bought the property, they were meeting in the house. There was a kitchen.
Indeed. You jumped to one of the things I was going to talk about, but it's absolutely appropriate. I'm going to go ahead and just take a look at this. Came out of the 20th century controversies in churches of Christ about the missions of the church. Is the local church authorized to provide social meals, entertainment as part of its work? The answer is no. Just so we're clear. In some places, the debate shifted from church-sponsored social activity to the mere existence of a room and appliances. This becomes a problem. So, we talk about things like institutionalism. And so places will label a congregation institutional, non-institutional. The thing is, the Bible labels someone as being right or wrong. And you can be right in many elements and wrong in another element. And that's the thing that we need to address. So the issue of having a kitchen largely came out of, I believe, this last one. It is using the Lord's money and the Lord's property for common meals. That is the crux of the argument of institutionalism. I agree, I don't like the label, but I agree with many of the principles about institutionalism and not using the Lord's money for anything that it's not authorized for. So just for the record, I agree with that. I just don't believe we should create a doctrine around it. We should just deal with, does the Bible say that we can do this? Does the Bible tell us to do this? That's how we should address it, Brother Young.
When this issue arose, was there any counter suggestions saying that, or ask whether Christians should share a meal together or have fellowship?
Yeah, so, that's a really good question, and that's one of the reasons this was so interesting, just researching some of the history. I knew things, but there were still things that were a little bit surprising when you start looking at the history, the best you can reconstruct it. The issue really was about two things: using the Lord's money for a certain thing, and this slide to more of a social type of gospel and doctrine. So we use the social to draw people. We use the social to get people here. We're going to have food served, so come for that particular reason. So those are two separate issues, and then they became blurred over time. Now, using the Lord's money for it is things like, well, hey, we're going to take the money's given to support the work here, and we're going to buy a bunch of food and feed everybody. And that's a separate issue. So now you ask about people coming together and sharing a meal. Most would agree there's nothing wrong with that. I was at a military congregation. Let me address this and we'll get to your question. I was at a congregation that was largely military, and people came from a lot of different bases, military bases. They came and they came together, we'd worship God, and then when you'd break, because we have a evening Bible study and evening worship, actually had the two separated, in the evening, we're basically there all day. No one could go home and get a meal, and so people brought food and ate together. Christians brought food and ate together. Why? Why didn't they go buy something? Because most of us were poor. So people brought food and ate together. That's what we did. Had nothing to do with the Lord's money. So, and it had nothing to do with drawing people. Again, lines became blurred. There are some real valid concerns about how the Lord's money is being used. There's a valid concern there. And this broadens, this will be broadened as we talk about it a little bit. And then there's a valid concern about our purpose for coming together. Let's see, I think you're next.
I was reading some documents about early Christian churches, and this was in the 200s. So, a couple hundred years after the church. And they were being accused by all the other pagan religions around them about, well, we see you guys get together and eat like we do. And they very clearly, they had written a response that all the money that we give is used to support people. We do not use any of the Lord's money for food. We pay for that all of ourselves. And so this is not a new situation. It's been around for 2,000 years, this question. And that's how they dealt with it then. And that's how most people deal with it now.
I've come across the same sort of information, and it was fascinating how far, like I said, I know it's not a brand new issue, but it's surprising how far back it went. And the core being the funds, one of the cores being the funds, is interesting because that is important. We shouldn't discount that part, but we still should teach accurately about it and then make proper decisions based upon that. Michael, did you have? Yeah. Okay.
At one time, we had potlucks at West Anaheim, and they stopped for reasons of, that you mentioned and the controversy. And I brought up, at the time, I thought it was kind of ridiculous, but I brought up the thing because they had like coffee pot and stuff like that. They run extension cord out of the church. And they says, well, we're using the Lord's electricity, we're spending money. And I thought, well, people can pay for it on their own,
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, again,
but they didn't want to do that.
we can make very big, we can make arguments about that, but it's usually we're making arguments because we don't want something to happen. If someone plugs in their cell phone because it's low on charge, no one's going to say anything about that. Really, they're not.
If you want to say anything, I'll just send you a bill.
Yeah. 5 cents. So again, consistency then becomes a problem. If you're going to talk about something as being just wrong, we should be consistent. Now, again, we start serving coffee. Why? What's that for? What's the purpose? I don't think that would do it.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I don't think that would keep you awake. I'm sorry. You all have to just toughen up.
It's to attract people, obviously.
It's to attract people. Now, that's our, that's the thing to talk about. That's the thing to address. Is that what we're trying to do? Is that the reason we're trying to draw people? Now, we have a potluck at the house, and the church comes together and we want to invite people to that potluck. Anything wrong with that?
No.
Yeah, it's a good thing to try to get to know people, right? Come together socially and get to know people. Now, the church is going to pay for all the food.
Nope.
See, we can determine right and wrong. Getting together, socializing, is good for us. Drawing other people to an environment where we can sit and get to know each other casually, have conversation. That's a good thing too. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't be careful. Yes.
Yeah, the other question we need to ask is, when talking about kitchen and fellowship, these are physical properties. Then anybody ask whether the kitchen, is it okay to be attached to the main sanctuary? Or is it okay to be separated? And if it is separated, how far is the kitchen or fellowship hall is to be built or located away from the sanctuary? So anybody brought that?
Yeah,
No?
so, I mean, again, now we get back to what you had talked about the house. If you're meeting, I'm not talking about meeting for a Bible study. I'm talking about actually having service in a house. And we talked about that for us, right? As we were selling the building and buying a property, what happens if we don't have a place to meet? And the possibility of meeting in a home was raised, right? So if we did that, would we burn down the kitchen? Of course not. We know that. We know that.
In my house for 2 years after we split with another group.
Again, we know these sort of things aren't even discussed in the context of a home. So the issue then becomes the church's ownership. We had a kitchen here because we bought it, it had a kitchen. We removed the kitchen. I'm glad we don't have a kitchen here,
That's not why we removed it, but
but it's
Yes.
not why we removed it. We removed it because we felt like there was better use we could make of the space. Let's just be honest, that was our motivation for moving it.
Yeah.
Now, I'm glad it's not here, because it's a sticking point for some people. Some people see a kitchen and they assume you're institutional, you're using the church funds incorrectly, and that's part of the point that's being made here, to have a kitchen or a fellowship hall. I was at one congregation that had a fellowship hall. How did you know it was a fellowship hall? It said, above it was labeled fellowship hall. So took the sign down and put up multi-purpose room. Now there's no problem. Didn't change anything in the room. But it was a problem to call it a fellowship hall because it has a certain connotation. That's ridiculous. Honestly, that's ridiculous. Our use, right or wrong, of a room is just a room. This is a classroom because we set it up to be a classroom. It could have been a really large nursery. That would have been a good problem to have, huh? A nursery this large. Yes.
we, a lot of times, go a long way to say, the building's not the church, we're the church. We even said it earlier today. We say that, and yet, for some reason, we still put some emphasis on the building being special. That it's like a temple or something. Don't run in the building, don't do this, don't do things that we would do if it was a different building. And I think that that's part of it. We keep assigning some kind of special feelings to a building. It's just a building.
You know, it is just a building, and at the same time, I do think we should treat this place as being special, but without losing the proper frame of mind, the proper
agree.
context of that.
Yeah.
You know, God has blessed us with having a place to meet. There are so many people that don't have such a nice, convenient place to meet. By having this consistent place to meet, we're able to broadcast. So those who aren't able to come are able, and there are those who have discovered us. We've had so many visitors. I ask them all the time, how did you find us? YouTube is the answer. YouTube, consistently, that's the answer. So a lot has been afforded us, and we can appreciate that and still know we're the church. Honestly, we have to believe that. If this building were to burn down, we go on.
Yep.
We continue. Yes.
I think part of that confusion for some people that don't study the Bible enough comes from the Old Testament with all the temples, you know, and, you know, the temple was God's place. And so they bring that into our reality and it doesn't fit.
Yes.
But they still started that way. It's a kind of a, I don't know.
Yeah, there is, I mean, again, a lot of misapplication happens, but then there's some good things, and I don't want us to miss that. How we utilize the Lord's money is relevant. It does make a difference. But looking at a place and seeing that they have a kitchen doesn't mean that they're taking the Lord's money and feeding the neighborhood with that money. And that's what a lot of the concern was. You know, going out and feeding people with that. Yes.
So the issue now is early church have problem with Judaizing teachers still clinging to the old way of doing things or belief. So Paul accommodated them for a certain period of time. So will it be eventually talk about how to solve this problem of getting rid of Judaizing teachers and their influence in the church?
It's already been addressed. It was addressed back then. Now, what people are going to do, they're going to do, and they're going to be judged for it. They're going to bear the consequences of it. But it's all been addressed. Look, Paul spoke, the times of this ignorance God winked at, but now command all men everywhere to repent. That's what he stated. What was he talking about? He said God is not worshipped in temples made with hands as though he needed anything. He's addressed this particular topic, and yet man won't universally accept it. But God has never stated anything for us about somebody else's acceptance. The thing we're dealing with first is us. First, we have to be in line with God. Then, what do we need to do?
Us being ourselves,
Yes.
then our local congregation, and then the lost.
I'm saying it's us here. We need to make sure we stay in line first. We understand God's word. Then what do we do with that?
Teach.
There we go. How'd you know I was going to say that?
I don't know.
It is not. It is not a light thing to say. That's the thing you're talking about. There is our mission. This is one of the reasons we should not stay so isolated. As a congregation, every congregation is autonomous, right? But the Bible never said anything about isolated. And the churches of Christ, many of them have become very isolated. One won't deal with another. That's not good. Look, it'd be much better for us to be of influence on someone else if we can be a proper influence. That's why I said it's important for us to know the truth. We have to know the truth before we can take it out there. We don't want to go out spreading error. So the Judaizing teachers and people holding to the law and people perverting the gospel, it's always going to be with us. Paul gave that warning. This is going to happen. You guard against it. He told Timothy, guard against it. How? How was Timothy going to guard against that influence?
Is it teaching?
It was teaching.
Oh.
His whole job, study and teach. Make sure people know the truth. So that's why these sort of topics are important. Because like I said, they came from a good place. And equally, we could come from a good place in our teaching and start teaching people wrong just because we fear what they might slide into. Yes.
Rephrase that, start teaching people wrong?
we might start teaching people incorrectly.
Okay, we
If
don't want to. teach
Right.
them.
We've got to be careful. We can come from a good place. No, I actually said what I intended. Maybe I
Okay.
didn't say it clearly enough, so let me say it clearly. We can start with good intentions and start teaching people incorrectly based upon our good intentions. We need to teach people the truth. And we can warn people. We can tell people to be careful. I'm not one that's for social things to bring people to church. That's one of those areas that, yes, people can start sliding with. Then it becomes, well, what else keeps people from coming to church? Well, they're hungry, so we feed them. They don't like the name of the church, so we change it. They don't like the type of singing, so we alter it. Look, those are things that you can slide into. It doesn't make any individual thing wrong. I would warn against the propensity to try to please people when it comes to bringing them to the Lord. Give them the truth and let them accept it or let them reject it. Yes, Brother Tharp.
I watched a big long video yesterday about mega churches and how most of them have collapsed. And they outlined exactly what was wrong, that they tried to please the people. We'll make better music, we'll make an influential preacher who everybody loves, we'll do all these things. And I think it's like 15,000 mega churches have collapsed in the last 10 years. Because it was aimed at one generation, and the next generation that came along sees it as the falsehood that it is, that there's no spirituality behind it. It's just entertainment. They're coming, and they're coming because they always have come. And it's collapsed. So why would we want to follow some lost strategy that doesn't work?
Yeah, because of our own purposes. A lot of preachers are seduced by money. A large congregation, large contribution, right? So, of course, you're giving so that I can have a plane. I need a plane. I got to have a plane, right? It's the motivation of some people preaching the gospel. Be careful who you get. I've told you before about a congregation that chose someone who promised to double the membership in a year. And I warned against that. What man can make that sort of promise and not compromise God's word? When that's your focus, there's a problem. So why would the congregation pick someone like that? Well, they felt he was very charismatic and he would lead to a vast increase in membership. A lot of those things are true. If this congregation wants to really just explode in numbers, replace me with Denzel Washington. A lot of people will come. A lot of people.
And a praise band, and free meals, and all that stuff.
Yes. Let's get a video wall so we can have, a multimedia.
Themselves also will want to come here and preach, right?
No, not at all. But I would ask him, what would you preach? That's the thing. It's not the person. It's got to be the message. But the person, for a lot of people, would be a draw. And so people will compromise the message in order to draw people. We need to be careful. But we also always have to be honest. That's all this class is about, is the need to do both. Be honest and still be cautious. So I'm not going to go on to my next point, so I'll ask this question. I've probably indicated this before. Some congregations want to feed the hungry. Can we do that?
Yes.
Yes.
Sure.
It's not with the
with our
Lord's
own
money.
money.
Wow, you guys are boring. I wanted somebody to dissent. Yes, yeah, that's, so, but congregations, if someone publicizes that they go out and feed the hungry, people will say, oh, you're institutional. Well, it depends. So we've got to, that's why I don't like the label. We've got to be about more than that. Is there something that's actually being done that's right? Is there something being done that's wrong? Versus kitchen equals sin. That's not Bible. Brother,
If
Yeah.
we did use the church money to feed a hungry person that came, will it be wrong?
I don't see an example of the normal giving that we do to support the work here as being part of that, because I don't see that specifically as the work of the church. Now, that doesn't mean that we should not help those who are in need. But again, that's not what the contribution is for. And we see special contributions that were taken up for specific needs. And even then, it was usually within the church. However, we know if we wanted to, again, the best example I can give is the example we did. We went to the Santa Ana Mission, where homeless people were gathered. They had to check in every night. We'd go out and we'd bring lunches. As a congregation, we would do this. Now, some might say that's wrong, but let's deal with the details. We brought, so one person would bring some bread, one person would bring some meat, and we'd assemble lunches and take them out. And it came out of our individual pockets. What one person could not do on their own, a group of people could do, but still it was the individuals in the church. It wasn't the giving that did it. Is that a good work? Certainly it's a good work. Can I do it on my own? I certainly can do it on my own. Can I do it on that scale, that magnitude on my own? No. And so that's why you get 2 or 3 people that decide to do it. If we get 5 people from this congregation doing it, is it wrong to say this is what the congregation is working on? Because that's what we are. We are that group. So again, sometimes people get it all mixed up and we decide not to do good works. And that's a shame. We decide to avoid helping people when we can. And that's a shame. Now, again, don't get me wrong. I'm not advocating the use of the contribution for that purpose. I do want to be clear on that. However, we can accomplish great things. Yes.
Let's say we had a potluck in a park. Money's out of our own pocket. Put up the stuff and we put up a sign, feed the poor. But all that food was purchased by members that were volunteering. Wouldn't be wrong, would it?
Would not be wrong at all. Again, there's just no Bible against anything like that.
Yeah.
Again, so what it's become, and if you were to talk to people who might have a problem with that and talk the details, they would tell you, no, there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is it's easier to strike a label on something than to deal with nuance. We have to then start dealing with the nuance. And that inconvenience causes us to teach erroneously. It's better to go on and deal with whatever nuance. What else do we have to do other than to teach people properly? What do we have more important to do? Why are we in such a hurry?
That would be a good teaching too.
Yeah, let's teach people. Let's teach people correctly. All right, I'm going to close this here. I think we'll have one more class. I've consolidated. That often turns into two, so don't hold me to that. All right. Thank you again for your attention. We'll go into some songs.